If you open any newspaper in India, you will find there is a term which has made a very significant presence, and that term is MOU. Now, often you find that the term is not fully defined or not fully specified. You are expected to know what MOU stands for. It is an important government initiative. It is a policy towards public enterprises. In fact, if you ask public enterprises, there are two kinds of public enterprises: the MOU public enterprises, the non-MOU public enterprises. In fact, it's become a symbol of prestige. MOU has acquired tremendous significance of late. MOU stands for Memoranda of Understanding. It is not a new concept, either in India or abroad. In India, this is our third year with the same policy. Abroad, of course, it's been there for a very long time, starting some 20 years back in France with a report by one Mr. Simon Nora. The concept has essentially remained the same. Wide varieties of the concept can be found in different countries. The concept in its philosophy is about the same. That suggests that perhaps the concept is sound. Yes, there are countries who've had various degrees of success with the concept, but yet countries keep trying. They want to again revisit the concept and try to see if it can work for them. The concept essentially is that it is a contract between a public enterprise and the government, in which both parties to the contract lay down their mutual obligations. The idea is that at the end of the year, both parties should only be judged on the basis of what is specified in the contract. Of late, it has acquired new significance. There's a new excitement in this policy for people like us who work in this area. And just a few days back, an international conference was held in which the practicing managers and policymakers in our public sector were exposed to some of this international experience with regard to this policy. The conference was organized jointly by the Bureau of Public Enterprise and the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and was held in Delhi. In that conference, as I mentioned, besides our practicing managers and policy makers, we had some foreign delegates. The purpose of this program is to find out from our visiting friends from abroad about this policy. What is their experience? What do they feel about our policy? And see what we can learn about ourselves in this regard. We have a panel here, a very distinguished panel. This is for the first time that a conference like this took place, and we were able to put together such a panel. I will start introducing. On my left is Professor Jones. Professor Leroy P. Jones is from Boston University, where he's the director of the Public Enterprise Program and has had extensive experience in implementing systems which are similar to our MOU policy, which we are trying over here. Then we have Professor Ravi Ramamurthy, who has been involved with similar policies. Professor Ravi Ramamurthy is from Northeastern University. He finished his PhD from Harvard University and has been a visiting faculty at Harvard University. Then we have Mr. Istiqbal Mehdi, who is from Pakistan, where he has been associated with a similar policy for a very long time. Then we have Professor Suil Kwok, who is from South Korea. And then we have Dr. Dae-hee Song, again from South Korea, who's from the Korean Development Institute. And then, of course, we have here Mr. Suresh Kumar, who's Director General and Additional Secretary to Government of India in Bureau of Public Enterprises. So you can imagine we have a very high-powered panel, and it is full of professors, and you always have this problem when you have professors, that how do you say what you want to say in a very short time? The format of this program does not allow us to give individual lectures, which we would like to, for maybe 3 or 4 months on the subject, and therefore I would start immediately further lectures that I've been doing. I'll start with Professor Jones, and I'd like to go immediately to the topic and ask Professor Jones that put this policy in perspective for us, Professor Jones. What do you think, since you've been associated with so many countries which have gone through similar policies? Give us some sense of what this policy is, how it fits into the public enterprise policy in general.
Well, Professor Trivedi, as you know, this is an exciting time for students of public enterprise internationally. Certainly in the West, there has been more written and published on public enterprise, its problems and its solutions, than has come out in the last 20 years. There are two large classes of literature. Both are responses to a general perception in many countries that the public enterprise sector is not performing up to the standards with which it was originally established. In some sense, failing in its duty to contribute to the national welfare. And there's two general classes of response to that. One, which is perhaps the most dominant in the literature, is the idea of privatization or sale of the public enterprise. The other class of response is the one which is represented by the MOU strategy and by the strategies the other countries represented here will be talking about, which is to find a way of improving the performance of the existing public enterprises, bringing them to a standard of performance which was the hope at their inception. Some countries, of course, are pursuing both strategies, but I think it's useful to think of these two polar strategies as ways of dealing with the problem. As you said initially, the performance improvement based upon a management by objectives philosophy is what we're dealing with here. The idea is to trade off between increased response-making managers increasingly responsible for the results of their operation in return for increasing autonomy in pursuing those results. And there's therefore a two-part contract. There's a delegation, an agreement by the government and the enterprise that these are the particular, specific, clear, precise, quantifiable, measurable goals which the enterprise will pursue in a particular year. And it's worth reflecting on why that's so important. The private enterprise has a very clear objective. They know what they're supposed to do, which is to make profit. Now or in the future, it's very clear. On the public enterprise, on the other hand, they're supposed to do this good thing and that's a good thing, and pretty soon you have a long list of good things they should do, and they end up pursuing no objective. It's sort of as though, it's useful to think of, imagine, if you will, a soccer-football game, a football match, a soccer match to we Americans, in which you take away the goals. We now no longer have the goalposts. You've got the same players. What's going to happen in the soccer football game? Well, initially people will play very much the same way, but there'll be no penalty for showboating, for showing off your own individual skills. There'll be no return to teamwork. There'll be not much return to working very hard in practice, because you really have no way of saying, I can still say I'm a better team than you. We have no score to know. We don't know who's a better team at the end. What's going to happen to that particular league? Well, in many cases, your better players are in a league in pursuit of another league where they can show what their skills are. There are going to be a general decline in the quality of play. So I think the same thing happens whether it's university professors who are not evaluated by their students, the quality of teaching goes down. University professors who write articles which are not reviewed by their peers, the quality of those articles goes down. So there's a general principle of any goal-directed human activity which depends upon a measurement of performance in order to motivate the performers to excel. And so the first pillar of the new policy is one of clearly specifying goals, agreeing at the beginning of the year on what the goals are for the enterprise. The government and the enterprise says, this is what I want you to do this year, and then the second pillar is to leave them free to do that in the course of the year. So the second major component of the new philosophy is to delegate, agree for the government to delegate certain additional responsibilities to the enterprise in the course of the year. So there's an agreement, as you said originally, a memorandum of understanding with obligations on both parts. And the countries represented here have had some experience with implementing various variants of that strategy.
Thank you, Professor Jones. That was excellent. Now we know at least why we do what we do as far as MOU and similar policies are concerned. Let me go immediately to the country experience, and there Professor Kwok, who's from Seoul National University, a prestigious university in South Korea. Could you, Professor Kwok, tell us what is your system in short? I know you're a professor and you would like to tell us in detail, but could you kindly just summarize it for us, the gist of the system? I know it's a difficult thing, but please go ahead.
Yes, what you are calling here Memorandum of Understanding is what we call the Public Enterprise Performance Evaluation System. The system started in 1983 when the Korean government enacted a new law called the Government Invest Enterprise Management Act. When I say government invest enterprise, it means a public enterprise owned by the government, more than 50% majority, and invest by the government directly. And we started this performance evaluation system on the base of this law. So it is the performance evaluation system is compulsory and mandatory. All the government invest enterprise in Korea, at the present time there are 24 corporations in Korea, are evaluated on an annual basis. The whole theme of the system is this: give more autonomy to the public enterprise and increase accountability of each enterprise. This is the whole theme. But the main objective of the system is fairly simple. Let us have some improvement in the performance of the public enterprise, and then let us give to the public enterprise some incentives. So on the outset, we are saying more autonomy with more accountability, but the main theme, actual theme, is improve the performance of the public enterprise, so we will give you more incentives. The whole scheme has two divisions. One is the design of the evaluation system. The other one is the actual implementation of the evaluation. We designed the evaluation system before the start of the new year. And then after 1 year period, we start evaluation, actual evaluation. Actual evaluation is done in two aspects. The first one is a quantitative aspect. For example, each public enterprise is given certain objectives and missions in quantitative terms, so they know how much they achieve, that quantitative objectives. The other side is a qualitative aspect. You know, in public enterprise, you have to do better in personnel management, better jobs in procurement, so and so. So we evaluate the public enterprise in quantitative as well as quantitative basis. Usually, we assign 100 points. 50 of the 100 points go to the quantitative aspect. 50 of the 100 points goes to the qualitative aspect. At the end of the evaluation, the results come out. A public enterprise gets, let's say, grade A. Then if they are grade A, they are most well-run corporation in Korea. So they get incentives such as 3 months bonus. If they get grade B, they are well-run, up to the certain standard. Then they get something around 2.5 months monthly salary. So if they get, let's say, E grade, then they get only 1.5 months, or what we call 150% bonus. This is some idea of what we are doing in Korea.
Right. May I just ask another question, Professor Kwok? Who does the evaluation?
Well, the evaluation is done by ad hoc task forces set up by the government. And that ad hoc task forces consist of about 20 professors and 15 chartered accountants in Korea. So those chartered accountants conduct quantitative evaluation, and 20 professors conduct the qualitative evaluation.
Is this ad hoc task force an independent task force? Is it part of the government, or how does it fit into the structure?
It is a completely independent ad hoc task forces. We are appointed by the government, but once we are set up, we manage on our own.
Right. Thank you, Professor Kwok. Well, I would like to now turn to Mr. Istiqbal Mehdi, who's from Pakistan, and try to sort of see how is your system different from the Korean system, and what are the essential features of your system, Mr. Mehdi?
So this is a very interesting element that we have tried to achieve the same objective of improving the operational efficiency of public enterprises. but the route which we have taken in Pakistan is slightly different. And the basic features of the system which we have set up is that at the beginning of the year, we are setting up and negotiating targets with the chief executive of our public enterprise managers. We negotiate what are the targets which the unit is going to achieve during the course of the year, whether it is going to be in terms of profitability or it's going to be in terms of indigenization or so on. During the course of the year, we monitor the performance of those units against the targets. At the end of the year, there is a detailed examination of the performance of the enterprises takes place. There is a diagnostic report which is prepared in which we try to look into the real efficiency of the performance of the managers. We try to diagnose what has been the actual performance, what have been the weaknesses, and what were the strong points of the managers. Based on this examination, we grade the units in one of the 5 categories, A, B, C, D, and E. A is referring to an excellent performance, just like in Korea, B, very good, and C, good, and so on and so forth. Each grade is linked with a performance bonus. Now, there is in the beginning of my presentation, I said that there is a difference in the route of Pakistan and South Korea. The route is essentially that we are negotiating the targets with the enterprises with the assistance of a professional body which is called Expert Advisory Cell, which is a semi-autonomous body linked with the Ministry of Production. The second element which is slightly different from Korea is that Korea is covering a wide range of activities, which is 25 government-sponsored corporations in which there are various activities like banks, like utilities, like manufacturing, whereas we have confined ourselves only at present to the large manufacturing sector. And these are the two basic difference. And because of this difference, that in Korea they are covering a very large area which is in the domain of the various administrative ministries, so they have a legal cover to the system which they have introduced. Whereas in Pakistan, this need was not felt because all the large manufacturing sector happens to be under one administrative ministry.
Thank you, Mr. Mehdi. That's very interesting, because what I'm getting is that both of you are following a similar approach in the sense that now you've moved from, as Professor Jones mentioned a moment back, from controlling by procedures to controlling by results. It seems that both of you have a professional body of people who are evaluating, who seem to be more objective, seem to be outside the usual machinery of the government, or at least they have an independence which is recognized and they have some credibility. And so while you have some similar features, yet you have your own distinctive things which have worked in your two countries. Now that brings me immediately to Mr. Kumar, who is, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, in charge of this policy here in India. And Mr. Kumar, if I may ask you, so what has been our experience? I mean, how do you relate to what our friends from the other places have said?
Well, Praja, as you mentioned right in the beginning, the Indian experience really started about 2 years ago. In fact, it was Arjun Sen Gupta in his report in 1984, which was accepted by government in 1985, that the French concept of MOU was actually adopted as a government policy in this country. And we really started with the task of working out the details. Now, actually, our task was to draw up these MOUs, and 2 or 3 companies were selected. But obviously the focus in their case was as to what to put into these MOUs. And I think initially how they will be and who will evaluate them was a problem which was kept a little in the back of everyone's mind. This particular reform took place last year, when we came to the conclusion that it is not enough that you know what is to be inside the document which is agreed to between the two parties to the contract or understanding, but also who is going to evaluate, how, and the system should be credible. And it is for this reason that we started looking for the system outside as to how these problems were tackled in other countries. And we did make a desk examination of the Pakistani system, although we would have liked to visit you at that stage. But we went to Korea and had a look at their system. And we found that it was possible to adopt this part of the system to a considerable extent in India. But at the same time, we found that it required a tremendous amount of training of people, because the number of companies by this time had increased to about 17 or 18, and each chief executive and each government functionary had to know exactly what should go into these documents. So it was in this context that whereas we tried to provide support to these companies and government departments of what should go into the MOUs and how they are going to be evaluated, we also thought that this is the time to expose all of them to the international experience, so that if there are any new twists which need to be given, they can be given now rather than later, because we will lose about a year if we didn't do it in the month of March. And in fact, this was the great justification for why all of us are here today. And we think that our purpose has been served, and it will be possible for us, given our circumstances, to make good documents and perhaps evolve the system over the next few months or a year.
Mr. Kumar, may I just ask quick questions? We are running out of time, with a panel like this, and I would like to, because it's an interesting question. I was, observing the seminar, the workshop. I noticed there were two questions. If you could give a very quick response, because I'd like to get to the others on the same thing, is that some people did question that what can we learn from the experience of others, especially Korea, that we are such a different country. We are a large country, we are small. How would you respond to that?
In fact, so far as we are concerned, we don't think that you can't learn from others. If there are good features in the systems adopted by others, it should be possible for us to adopt them. And mind you, we have adopted the system recently, so we can't claim that we have got an old experience in this, and therefore we would not like to receive new or fresh things on this. So we consider that to learn from the experience of others would be a good thing in our case. Of course, questions have been raised that whether the problems in these countries are similar to ours because of the magnitudes involved. In the case of South Korea, I think in terms of magnitudes it was the same. The percentage GNP which is controlled by their government-invested corporation is about the same as in the case of India.
Right.
And they were having similar problems at the time when they...
I think that is interesting, because very few people know this, that Korea and India had a similar ratio as far as the ratio of GDP is concerned coming out of public sector. Yes. I think that's interesting, and I think this is also interesting that the problems were similar even though we are very different countries. May I now quickly move to Ravi. Professor Ravi Ramamurthy, as I mentioned, teaches in the United States. He's been involved in similar systems in many countries, including Bangladesh. He's got considerable experience, and I'll make it open-ended. Ravi, feel also free, since we are running out of time, to tell us what you feel about our system here.
Let me respond, pick up on a point that Suresh Kumar was making about the relevance of the experience of other countries to India. If you looked at individual country studies on the problems of public enterprise, even though there are differences, vast differences among the countries in terms of their culture, their history, their economic conditions, you find such striking similarities in the nature of the problems that they're talking about. You would almost think the authors of those reports were colluding to say the same thing. So in one sense, we're all very different, but in another sense, the problems are quite similar. One of the core problems that keeps coming up over and over again is this attempt to balance autonomy versus accountability. I think the problem itself for a long time was not framed properly. It was viewed as striking a balance between the two. That is, if you had more accountability, by definition you must have less autonomy. We now realize that that is really not the case, and that we can have more of both. Provided by accountability, we mean accountability for results. And by autonomy, we mean autonomy for operational matters, and not the other way around. We certainly don't want to give managers autonomy to decide goals and broad policies. And we don't want to hold them accountable too much for just for procedures. So once you're clear about that, you find it's possible to have more of both. There is, however, one big problem. That explains why it has taken countries 30 years to start to do some of these innovations that we're talking about. And that is, it's much easier to change the amount of managerial autonomy that public enterprises enjoy, and far more difficult to increase their accountability for results. There are a host of problems that we face in the process. There are technical problems and there are institutional problems. One of the key institutional problems I will mention is the problem of the asymmetry in expertise and information between the government and the enterprises. And it's interesting that in all of the countries attempting to solve this problem, that is one of the things they're most concerned about. How can we build, on the part of the government, the expertise to conduct this so that we can actually hold them accountable for results?
What are your impressions? Since you've come, you're based in the United States, you've come here, you work for the public sector here, you have worked for the government here in the Planning Commission, I know, and you're teaching there and involved with so many countries. What is your impression coming back?
Well, I know we're running out of time.
Yes.
I used to work in the public sector about 15 years ago, soon after I got my MBA. And and since then I've been following events in the public sector in India and in other countries. I think this is perhaps one of the most significant developments that I have seen taking place in the management of the Indian public sector. We've gone beyond the point of rhetoric, beyond the point of non-solutions, such as blaming managers for the problem, or blaming politicians for the problem, or simply trying to reorganize everybody and hope that somehow the problems will get solved. We're trying to do something that's innovative, constructive, creative, and we're building on the experience of other countries. It is in this manner that the private sector develop new management systems and tools for managing new management problems. Public sector has a different kind of problem. We can't take any solutions from the private sector and just transplant it to the public sector. We need to experiment. Countries are starting to do it, and I'm extremely hopeful and optimistic about where this is going to lead us.
Well, thank you very much. That makes us feel real good. But before we run out of time totally, we've said it several times, I would like to ask Dr. Dehi Song, who's a researcher, who does research on this, who has provided the intellectual foundation for the Korean system, to tell us briefly, and this has to be brief, that what has been the result of the system in Korea?
Well, the impact of Korean performance evaluation system could be explained in three different ways. First, the number of deficit-making public enterprise has been decreased substantially. Before the system introduced, about 20% of Korean public enterprise generate deficit, become burden to the country. But after we introduced the performance evaluation system, 3 years later, none of the Korean public enterprise generate deficit. All make profit. And second, the cost of production has been substantially decreased. We checked since we introduced the system, each year the reduction of the cost. We found about 5% of the cost has been reduced. It's amount to about $1 billion per each year. And thirdly, public opinion has been changed, positively changed. In the past, the public opinion appeared in the newspaper